In a city like Denver, it is hard to imagine that disparities in things like reproductive care even exist. You wouldn't think access to reproductive care is an issue with a city that is so predominantly Democratic and seen as a huge safe haven for those seeking something like an abortion or just a basic pregnancy checkup. As we see rampant abortion bans in states across the country, it is easy to assume that states like Colorado and cities like Denver are doing so much better. But is our care really that comprehensive, or are blue cities like Denver suffering from health and care disparities that are just different?
My name is Ariana Morales. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the organizing director with New Era Colorado. I've been with New Era for the last 5 years in a bunch of different hats, but most recently as the organizing director, and before that I was the policy manager. The percentage of people who are now receiving abortion care in Colorado has skyrocketed.
Really?
Speaking to our partners over at Planned Parenthood, they're seeing people, I think, 2 times, 3 times the amount of what they were seeing before, which is both obviously hard on people who have to make out-of-state trips to receive abortion care, but also people in-state who also still need to receive that care, but are now having to wait longer to receive that.
When the Dobbs decision passed in the Supreme Court during the summer of 2022, the reproductive care landscape changed on a national level. Now, states have the right to extremely limit abortion, and this has a lasting effect on everyone seeking reproductive care. Could you please list your name, affiliations, and your pronouns, please?
Yes. Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez. I'm currently one of the Denver City Council women at large, and I'm also a former state representative. I represented House District 4, which is North and West Denver. She, her pronouns. I am really, really grateful that we are a safe place for people. Right, we're safe for people coming from other states that don't have these same types of protections. I know we look at like Texas, for instance, where we know we've seen a large number of folks coming from the state of Texas, and I think it has created some concern, right, for access here as well for people. And I have heard stories from people trying to access, healthcare here. That they are having to wait.
While Colorado and Denver more specifically are quite progressive, our city and many others like it are still pinned down by the oppressive institutions that reach nationwide and cause even more strain on the reproductive care available. Systemic racism, poverty, transportation, lack of education, and many others like them. These issues exist as a result of institutional practices that cause many of the other problems, including reproductive care deserts. And since Dobbs, things have only gotten worse.
I'm Kasha. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a volunteer abortion doula with the Colorado Doula Project. By career, I work in nonprofit fundraising, so I am kind of in touch with the nonprofit world, which the Colorado Doula Project is. But I think that my connection to the world of reproductive justice in general really stems from kind of like my more personal background. I grew up in a very small town in Illinois, which was kind of like a healthcare desert. Like if you had a heart attack, you would have to drive 45 minutes. If you needed like maternal care, an abortion, anything like that, it could be upwards of an hour. Like there just weren't those resources around. So upon moving to Denver and learning about all these moving parts for reproductive justice, whether it be maternal health, you need an abortion, Plan B, whatever, I just really was suddenly immersed in a community that did have these resources and was focused on finding ways to get them to people. So I really wanted to be a part of that. After the Dobbs case, the fundraising just went through the roof. And there was a month where everybody was supporting abortion organizations and clinics that provide abortions.
That's great to hear.
But then it completely stopped. People don't understand just how nonprofits, how health clinics work when it comes to funding, and how necessary it is just to have sustainable support instead of reactive support.
Because it's a lot less it's just boom, there you go, there's your money. And then 6 months later, you're I still need money. And then they're what?
Yeah, exactly. I think that and also just people's involvement with pregnancy and abortion health in general, like there was a spike of awareness, and then like everyone's attention moved elsewhere, and like there were suddenly a lot of volunteers, and then a bunch dropped off. And like, you know, it's fine, like you don't have to commit your time to being a volunteer, but I also think that like in the grand scheme of like keeping maternal health, keeping abortion like on everybody's radar, like there's a really big issue about like there only being support when something bad happens.
So what is reproductive care desert? Well, a reproductive care desert is a region, whether rural or urban, that lacks comprehensive reproductive care. Now, this does include medical care, but is not limited to it. What we often see in reproductive care deserts is a lack of other vital resources like social support, financial means, and transportation. Some causal factors for reproductive care deserts include poverty, the lack of social support in medical spaces, and a lack of education about reproductive care. And so where does Denver fit into all of this exactly?
My name is Victoria Cunha. I am the Youth and Community Political Organizer at Color, a Colorado organization for Latino opportunity and reproductive rights. And I am also just a grassroots organizer for a DIY initiative called Bunnies Against Bans. And my pronouns are she, hers.
Can you tell me about some of the main struggles that the people you work with deal with as it relates to pregnancy and reproductive care in Denver?
Yeah, so in Denver particularly, we have this really high cost of living. We have a lot of migrants that are coming and are struggling to find housing. And even though, we have been a champion of reproductive rights in so many ways, through being one of the first states to legalize, decriminalize abortion, to passing the Reproductive Health Equity Act, and now this ballot measure that we're running, and I can talk more about that later. But essentially, there's a lot. There's a lot in this city still, even with all of that. 38% of Colorado counties are maternal care deserts. Many of that rural, but still we experience this in the city. And a lot of it comes down to, like I said, like having housing, having money, but then also your migration status, whether you're documented or not. And then of course, just transportation, of course, is the big thing. Denver, there's some light rail, there's some buses around, but that's still not as accessible. And then of course, there's just racism and sort of isms and prejudices that are there in the healthcare system. We still very much experience this. Like the majority of people who are affected by maternal care deserts are people of color. And so that still rings very much true in Denver, especially as our migrant population increases.
I think something that causes deserts of reproductive healthcare services is definitely the sentiment and like understanding that people have around abortion, but also just sexual education and reproductive healthcare services. Not every school in Colorado is mandated to have comprehensive, or not every school in Colorado is mandated to have sexual education in their schools. There was a law passed a couple years ago that mandated that if you are going to have sexual healthcare education, it has to be comprehensive, which was great, but not everyone has to do it. Some people can opt out of it depending on the school and the region. And so something that we find is that perpetuates itself, right? That if people don't totally understand, haven't received the sexual education or comprehensive sexual education, that abortion seems scarier, sexual health care seems untouchable, and that then turns into the cycle of stigma of then no one talks about it, it makes it even scarier. And when people are looking into providing abortion care services, someone tries to pass an ordinance saying that shouldn't happen in our town. Unfortunately, it's so true that in Colorado, so much of our healthcare services are really densely in the Front Range area.
Yeah.
A lot of our rural communities are lacking access to it, which is really unfortunate. And when they lack access to it, more anti-abortion centers we see will then find themselves in those areas and be like the sole educators in that area around reproductive health care and sexual health care.
The problems with Denver are not unique. They are existent across many cities in the United States, and exposing Denver's problems are exposing the problems of cities just like it. According to Dylan Scott, a health reporter from Vox, nearly 7 million American women of childbearing age now live in a county with either no maternity care services or with very limited services. Many of these counties are rural, which may seem like a totally different conversation when we are discussing Denver, a very urban location. The problem is that people in rural areas without any reproductive care are forced to travel to locations that do not provide those services. This causes services that may have already been limited in urban communities to be stretched even thinner by the overflow from other regions. With anti-organizations hell-bent on limiting life-saving care like abortion, advocating for restrictions to care, and misrepresenting their services as comprehensive reproductive care, it can make understanding the needs for care all the more difficult. And what are some struggles that you face on the advocacy side as it relates to your work?
I mean, it is not anything that like bogs us down, but the aunties, they're always there. They too have a lot of money and political backing, and they're not afraid to show up to things. They're not afraid to directly talk about what we're doing to their folks. And that is just something that we have to worry about with particularly with our safety and whatnot, and just how we take care of this information that like of the people that we serve, making sure that the aunties aren't, they're always watching our every move. So making sure that they're not picking out things that we might be doing wrong or whatever. So lots of different things, but I would say definitely the aunties are a big part of it. We have to be careful.
Anti-organizations, also known as anti-abortion organizations, are organizations that are opposed to abortion. Usually, this is on religious grounds. However, that is not always the case. The problems with them lie with the deceptive tactics they use to convince pregnant people that they don't want an abortion, often using methods such as giving false information or guilt tripping. The quote-unquote care they provide is not actually comprehensive care that involves reviewing all of the options a pregnant person has. This contributes to the navigation of the reproductive care landscape in our current society as challenging at best. If someone may want or need an abortion or be in an unsafe situation in which pregnancy is endangering them further, that birthing person is put at even more risk. As a whole, according to a graph posted by the OECD, the United States maternal mortality rates are extremely high as compared to other developed nations. This is especially true for people of color. According to a Vox article reporting on the issue, Black women and American Indian women are especially at risk of either serious complications or death in pregnancy. 1 in 4 births in American Indian babies occurs in a county with no or limited maternity services, as do 1 in 6 Black babies' births. They were found to be more likely to have received inadequate prenatal care and experienced higher mortality rates than their white and Hispanic peers. Could you please list your name, affiliations, and pronouns, please?
Sure. My name is Jenna, and I am just a doula. I work for myself, but also I am affiliated with Mama Bird Maternity Health and Wellness Spa. That's kind of who gave me my start in the doula game. And my pronouns are she and her.
Wonderful. So can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you became interested in doula work?
Yes. Well, personally, I'm married. I'm a mother of 5. So I've had many, labor and birth experiences. And it was through those experiences that I had that weren't necessarily the best. And also my older sister, God rest her soul, she passed away due to an ectopic pregnancy. And I can't help but wonder if she had access to a doula at that time that could have, discussed her symptoms and, could have basically caught it before it was too late. So those things are really kind of what inspired me to, get into this line of work and try to help women not have those same experiences.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background as it relates to, being a pregnant person, you maybe some general experiences you've had?
Mm-hmm. As a Black Muslim woman, being pregnant in America, obviously, the effects of racism aren't separate from, this pregnancy process. I was pretty much in like life or death situations with 3 of my births. And I don't mind getting into details. I think it's important to talk about it. The first experience that I had where I almost died was with my second pregnancy. I was pregnant with my daughter. Everything seemed fine. And it was probably about 12 hours after delivery, I got up to use the bathroom. And as soon as I stood up, it was as if like a bucket of blood poured out of me. So, we call the nurse in, and then all of a sudden they call a code white, and there's like 50 people in the room. And it turns out I had retained placenta, like all of the placenta didn't come out. And just due to the emergence of the situation, I wasn't even able to go back into surgery, and the doctor had to come in the room and go about forearm deep inside of me. No anesthesia, nothing. He had to actually like grab the placenta with his bare hands. And so that was obviously, very unpleasant, very painful. And now that I am a doula, I understand more about the pregnancy process. I'm like, oh, well, that could have been avoided if someone would have simply, inspected the placenta after delivery to determine, oh, hey, there's a piece still inside. And yeah, so just, bleeding out and having that experience was very upsetting,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And had other issues in other pregnancies that just, again, now that I have more knowledge, it's like, oh, so many things could have been avoided if people would have just, taken the time to do their jobs thoroughly. There was another situation. This was in my next pregnancy, my third pregnancy with my son. I was at a doctor's appointment, and the appointment was kind of like at the end, and I overheard the doctor talking to, I think, one of the techs. I can't remember who exactly, but they were talking. I kind of overheard them talking about me. They mentioned something about placenta previa, and I was like, oh, hey, like, what is that? What does that mean? And they were like, oh, it just means that, the placenta is, on top of the cervix, and if it doesn't migrate by the time of labor, then you'll have to get a C-section. That was it. I'm like, okay, cool, no problem. A couple of weeks later, me and my husband are being intimate, and all of a sudden, blood starts pouring out of me. So call 911, get in the ambulance, get rushed to the hospital. And they're just like, hey, like, what's going on with your pregnancy? Have you been diagnosed with anything? And I'm like, no. But, the more I think about it, I'm like, oh, well, at one of my appointments, they did mention I had placenta previa. And then as soon as I say that, everyone's like, oh my God, like, you cannot be intimate. You cannot have sex while you have this condition. And I'm like, no one literally told me that. And so just every time that would come up, while I'm in the hospital, everyone was just like, how did you not know? I'm like, no one told me. And then that just led to me constantly bleeding. At that point, I think I was about 22 weeks pregnant. So my son was kind of like on the cusp of being able to live outside of the womb or not. And that just led to me continuously bleeding. I was released. The bleeding got under control within the next 24 hours. They released me, but I just kept bleeding kind of on and off during the pregnancy. And I ended up being hospitalized because the bleeding wouldn't stop. And it was just this, snowball effect of all these complications, again, because someone did not do their job, didn't inform me, didn't let me know, how I needed to be caring for myself to make sure that I'm safe and that the baby is safe.
And this isn't even including citizenship status. The barriers that exist include language and cultural practices for those who are immigrating and may be monolingual are huge. Unfortunately, in safe places like Denver, this only furthers the strain on good care being accessible and exacerbates other neighboring issues related to reproductive care.
We've been talking about this a little bit, but like the migrant crisis that is only just increasing, right? We have Greg Abbott and other states in the South busing people over, and not only does that affect the ability to serve unhoused folks and that just like the pressure on direct service organizations, it changes the makeup of the city. And you've started to see some people be like, oh, there's just like migrants going around with backpacks that are just hanging around. And some of them are starting to get into sex work to be able to survive. And that's just creating more and more prejudice, more and more just racism against these folks. And of course, too, that not only extends to our migrants and like Latinos, but also Black and Indigenous folks here in the state. Of course, like you could get into the statistics of it all, but of course, Black and Indigenous folks face higher maternal mortality rates than any other race. So you especially experience that here in Colorado, where it's a very white state, but in reality, it's a very diverse state, not just in Denver, but in the Western Slope, in the mountains, in the South. And I think that's just something that people tend to forget or just don't necessarily want to acknowledge, I think, because they've just been so comfy with how Colorado looked for a while.
Similar to Jonna's story, an overarching problem with care in general and in Denver is this lack of education and over-medicalization of the care itself. Over-medicalization of care is when the medical staff treating a pregnant person overlook or ignore the need for emotional and mental support a pregnant person may require. It is all too often that overworked medical professionals don't always see the emotional and mental harm being done to a patient while they're just trying to administer care. They more often than not are just trying to do their jobs, but it is the institution of for-profit healthcare and systemic racism that they must work under that cause these disparities in care. And more often than not, this causes those in poverty and dangerous situations, whether people of color or not, to be victimized when just trying to reach out for help. Could you please list your name, affiliations, and your pronouns?
My name is Heather. I am a mother, a student, and my pronouns are she, her.
Wonderful. Can you tell me a little bit about your background? This can be how you identify, this can be lived experiences, anything you want to share.
Yeah, so I moved to Colorado in 2017 because I was escaping an abusive marriage. And then my family in Kansas, they just weren't the healthiest. I didn't want to raise my children in the same environment that I grew up in, so I moved out here. And it's definitely been a journey since I've moved here on my own with 2 children. I originally was trying to begin a career in marketing, and so I was balancing college and my children. And then once I came out here, because I hadn't really dealt with any of the trauma that I experienced growing up, I found myself in another abusive relationship. Most of my life has just been me trying to heal from things and then trying not to bleed that trauma onto my children as well. And yeah, leading up to my pregnancy with my youngest, I had first met my son's father. We were living in the same apartment complex, and things happened pretty quickly, but within 3 months, he put me and my children in our first safe shelter. And that safe shelter was almost worse than the relationship. There were drugs being used by other people in the house. It was understaffed, so not much was being done about it. I think I stayed in that safe shelter for about 2.5 weeks before I rushed into getting an apartment with my ex, went back to him, and then things got really, really bad one night, and I had decided that I was going to leave. And a week later, I found out I was pregnant.
I'm Geneva. I am a home birth midwife with Sacred Birth Denver, author of Wisdom from the Womb, The Magic of a Baby-Led Birth. I am also a doula mentor, a mom of 4 beautiful beings, and a spirit and womb medicine practitioner. When I had my first, I got to the hospital, and I had been laboring at home for quite a while, but I'm a pretty calm and understated person as it is. And so when I walked in, and I was very calm and not yelling or screaming, I was just breathing through my contractions, and they said to me, you need to wait in this room until somebody can help you. And so I was in this room. My ex-husband was with me, but we were just in this room for, I don't know, it felt like hours. I have no idea how long it really was. But eventually I asked the nurse, I was like, can somebody just come in and check me, please? And she was like, well, all the doctors are in a meeting. Probably someone could come in and check you, but if they do, they're just going to tell you, they're just going to send you home. And so I waited longer The doctor finally came in and checked me, and I was 7.5 centimeters, which is,
Oh
we're
my
trying to get to
gosh.
10. And so, I just felt really like unseen, unheard, that like, if I wasn't acting the way that they thought I should act at some certain point, then I didn't deserve anybody to care for me. And then I had an unmedicated birth. I don't know, 85% of people get an epidural in America, and I did not get an epidural. And the hospital I was at was a teaching hospital, and so they invited, I think, all of the residents in to watch my birth because it isn't very often that they get to see a natural birth. And so I was never given the option, like, do you want all of these students to come in and watch you give birth? It was just like, all these people are going to be in here. And, when you're in that very end part of labor, like, I had no way at that point in my life to find words to say, this isn't what I want, or this feels really kind of violating to have all these people watch me give birth. And even like, I remember the doctors like whispering to each other, like as I'm pushing my baby out, like that I was unmedicated, and like I had like just a small tear, but like that they were like whispering about it, and like, hearing people like whisper about your body as you're doing this thing, just, it does feel somewhat disempowering of like, is this really my experience? Or, what is this experience? Am I here so that people can learn? And, I have a student. I ask most of my clients if they're willing to have a student participate, because that's how we can learn about birth, is by, you can only learn so much from a textbook.
And part of birth is about having autonomy.
Absolutely. So it should be like, it's always that person's choice, and not just like, hey, I'm going to have a student. There's going to be a student involved in your care, but like always having.
Do you want the student involved in your care?
Mm-hmm. And
Exactly.
like, please sign this form. If you ever decide that you don't want the student to be there, please know that it doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. Like, this is above all your experience, and we want it to be what you want it to be. But we rarely hear that kind of thing from mainstream care providers, and especially 23 years ago when I had my first. But
The system, in most aspects, was not built to support people living with what we consider to be outside of the norm. Heather's story is one like many others, trying to locate good care and also people who understand the precarious situation she was in. It can be difficult to understand the experience of a person when the healthcare system is driven by an understanding of a person's care and needs that really aren't based in reality. Reproductive care, at its core, is about having autonomy. And it's becoming more obvious that this is not the general experience for birthing people. Yeah, like I know we talked about this, but like the medicalization of care really just takes out that social support that people just require.
Mm-hmm.
Like saying a doctor saying something so matter-of-factly can feel
Mm-hmm.
very like, oh, they don't really care,
Mm-hmm.
or like kind of reducing something to a statistic rather than saying like, okay, but how are you feeling?
Yeah.
I've noticed that doulas really fill that void.
Yeah. I think a big part of being a doula too is being an advocate. The people who are treating the patient aren't always, I think, thinking as empathetically as they could be. So it's like kind of the doula's job to like just be the patient's advocate, read like, okay, does this person need a moment? Like ask the nurse, okay, we've just absorbed a lot of information. Can you give us a second? Just like take a moment to breathe. I did have an example where a nurse was like really pushing an IUD on a patient, and she kept explaining, no, I have pelvic pain, I want to do more research. And she was asked 3 times by 2 different people. So on the third one, I was like, hey, this is a different appointment. Like, I'm all for IUDs. I think that they're a great form of birth control, but that's like such a choice. And if somebody isn't sure, like, you just got to step back.
it can completely change someone's experience when they are required to be in their head, or when they are feeling watched, or when they're feeling unsafe in any way. Like, we know that the way that women give birth, the way that mammals give birth, is efficient when they feel safe. pregnant deer up in the mountains somewhere, her labor will stop if a mountain lion comes. And so like looking around this person's experience, like what are the mountain lions in their world?
I had always heard growing up, be honest with your doctor, you don't have to tell the cops everything. So whenever I got pregnant and I was enduring abuse and I don't have family out here, I don't have a support system, so I didn't really know who to turn to. I turned to my doctors. I told them what was going on. I was very honest with them. I felt like they were on my side. But in the end, I don't know, I felt like more damage was done by me being honest with them than had I just kept it in and held it to myself, because they didn't help me leave. They didn't help me do anything really. They did help me keep a healthy baby and have a healthy pregnancy or healthy childbirth.
Would you say that the social support was very much lacking?
Extremely lacking. My dream was to have a water birth. I wanted to I had my child before that completely naturally, no medication. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted to have that connection through birth. And in order to do that, I had to take a bunch of classes. And I feel like had I had access to a doula through like Medicaid or my insurance, my pregnancy would have went so different.
While Colorado is technically classified as a safe state in comparison to others around it, are we really that safe? The United States as a whole is extremely lacking in comprehensive reproductive care as it's compared to other developed countries. So is the care in quote-unquote safe states really comprehensive? Or is it the bare minimum of what is actually necessary to not only survive, but to thrive? It seems like the care exists in a very exclusionary landscape, expecting pregnant people to conform to the standards set by a system that prioritizes the profit that can be made off of them, rather than the needs and the safety of that individual.
My son was IUGR, which is intrauterine growth restrictions. They say that happens either because of smoking or because of stress, two things that I did do I had a ton of stress during my pregnancy, being abused the whole time. And then I was honest with my doctor about my marijuana smoking as well. And I ended up literally a week before birth, I had to move out of my partner's house and stay with a friend because I just wanted to be able to give birth without being abused. I was alone. No one was there for me. People that my family came in late. And like I cut the umbilical cord by myself with my left hand, and I'm right-handed. So yeah, little wins for me. But at the end, after I like passed the sac, they took it from me, and they tested it for marijuana, came back positive, and at the end of everything, I got a neglect charge because I had smoked during the pregnancy and it was still in my system when I gave birth. And, I look back and like, obviously I'm not proud of my consumption, but in my mind, that was the only thing that was keeping me from killing myself, because it was the only thing that was like slowing down those thoughts and keeping me present and reminding me giving me those moments for myself that I didn't have elsewhere. Actually, I think another very important thing to mention, I asked to have my tubes tied in the hospital as well. I am a single mother of 3 children now, and all my children have different fathers. Under 30 at the time, prime candidate for having my tubes tied. And the RN straight up told me, well, what if you meet another nice man in the future who wants babies? Like, I am here alone because I connect with abusive relationships. Like I've been in abuse my entire life, and like that's the past. Let me change my vocabulary on that. I used to attract abusive relationships and accept them.
I understand.
Yeah, and her answer, literally, I just sat there stunned. I didn't know what to say.
The lack of support present in the healthcare industry still affects real people. Human stories are often buried under a mountain of medical bills and are rarely given a platform to voice their experiences. Poverty is a huge player in this silencing and bleeds out into aspects that create pregnancy care deserts in urban regions like Denver that just shouldn't exist.
My name is Max. I use they, he pronouns, and I am a recent graduate from University of Denver with my master's in social work, and I'm an active member in the mutual aid community in Denver. So really my interest in mutual aid came when I found out about Mutual Aid Monday, which is a grassroots organization and grassroots group within the Denver community, specifically focused on the unhoused community within Denver and advocating for their rights and well-being within the county. And I was able to get more involved with them through a fellowship that I was a part of with my school during my second year of my master's degree. And that's where I really became a part of their community and have been involved since graduating.
Can you tell me some of the main struggles that people you work with deal with as it relates to pregnancy and reproductive health care in Denver? I mean, we already talked about sweeps, especially for houseless people, but what are some other things you've noticed?
The biggest barrier is housing. Always, usually.
Yeah, especially in Denver, it's so expensive.
Especially in Denver, yeah. If they're willing to go to like another county or something, but sometimes their benefits are in Denver, so they can't, like their food stamps, their Medicaid, all of their, if they get TANF or, if they're trying to apply for CCAP, like those are all acronyms for government assistance programs. But but if they only have those in Denver, they can really only receive those services in Denver.
Which really restricts them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could you please list your name, affiliations, and pronouns?
Sure. My name is Chantel Marie Lewis, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my affiliations, first, I'm a mom of 2 beautiful boys. I also serve on Denver City Council, so currently I'm a current councilwoman. And then I'm a mother to lots of folks in community as well.
Which it's really nice to know that we have someone in City Council that's like listening like that, because you don't always see that, and it's nice to know that, like, especially with the freezing sweeps ban that did not get approved.
It's a hard night.
Yeah,
that was a hard night. I just have to take like 1 minute just to say, freezing sweeps came organically from community, and on that same night we also had the ceasefire proclamation as well. And so both of those, unfortunately, didn't pass, and they were 2 really important pieces to the body, I think, but more specifically to community, that came directly from community, saying, hey, for freezing sweeps, we shouldn't sweep folks who are experiencing homelessness, who are living in unsheltered homelessness in our communities when it's 32 degrees or below, right? That's what the health experts have said. And so to see that being ignored, the health expert in that data, and more specifically, to hear from our unsheltered folks in our community saying this is what we need, and for the mayor and his administration to reject that, it was very disappointing.
Truthfully, Colorado is not a safe state for everyone, and Denver is not a safe city for everyone. The allocation of Denver's money and resources is not meeting the needs of those trying to access good quality care. And the ability to afford reproductive care is alone its own issue. When we also introduce problems like housing, the city sweeping people in freezing weather, the government benefits being difficult to obtain and hard to use, the facade of the safety in Denver begins to wane.
There was a doula program at this hospital, and they closed the doula program down because they didn't have funding. They also closed down their lactation program. They closed down like all of the peripheral services for women's health. And then that same year became like a sponsor of the Broncos. So it's like, where's our priorities with money? It's about advertising and getting more people to come there, but wouldn't advertising that we have better care for people, like we offer doulas, we offer lactation support, advertising that instead of having your name on a billboard at a Bronco game?
I have since learned about doulas, and I cannot stress enough how beneficial I feel that would have been. And like especially other mothers who are on Medicaid, who don't come from the best of homes, who are doing this alone. They need that extra support. Pregnancy is a very spiritual, heavy thing. Like, it changes your whole body, your mind, everything. So to have the extra support of a doula, I just feel like that could be so beneficial, especially for Medicaid patients, which is what I was the entire time. If there was a way for insurance to cover that, like, yeah, I just feel the birth experience here in Colorado could be so much different for mothers.
So, what we see is a larger issue that can be characterized through which the city is structured, how the culture perpetuates these care deserts, and how these two intertwine to create a problem in cities like Denver. Urban areas are especially unique as they are related much more to the social factors rather than just the physical access. In a city, a pregnant person with the means to take work off can afford to drive to an appointment 30 minutes away. However, for a pregnant person without access to a car, it has turned into an hour-long bus ride if they are lucky. For an hourly worker with an unstable income, this causes a lot more harm than good. And this doesn't even cover the actual doctor's visit. With the deep medicalization of care that comes with a regular hospital visit, the social connection and personhood is often removed from the actual care itself. It is cultural and structural problems that create an environment where reproductive care is difficult to access to someone whose identity and socioeconomic status does not meet the requirements to live in Denver.
I think I just needed like more education. I needed more support. And also I think access to like maybe a wider community of providers. Sometimes you find with insurance, like you can only see, this group of providers, or you can only birth at this hospital. But like maybe I don't want to see this provider. Maybe I had a really unpleasant experience and I want to go somewhere else, but I can't. And being a woman of color, if you turn down care from a certain provider, then that might, bring the concern, from the state, like with, okay, are you going to be neglectful to this child? Or we can say now that you've turned down care, and it's like a whole. It can just, it can turn into a
snowball.
lot. It can snowball and get really out of hand really fast because we don't have options to, a diverse pool of providers. That's so important because, systemic racism, these are relevant things that impact the lives, like the lives of, women who are birthing.
People of lower socioeconomic statuses are facing all of these walls, all of these barriers to access the healthcare that they need and they deserve. And this can be any type of healthcare. And you see like people live shorter lives if they don't have the financial means to access this type of healthcare.
When it comes to like those transportation barriers, do you think those exist here in Denver?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of my roles is to provide a car ride, and it's not just to people flying in from out of state. It is to Denver residents sometimes. Not everybody has a car. I think that sometimes as I'm going about my life in my car, I'm like, how would I function? But people do. But then when it comes to a procedure where you're under anesthesia, you wake up, you can't drive, you can't get on the metro, you can't like get in an Uber, like that's a huge issue. You need to have that support of transportation in your life, which is where somebody like me comes in, but also it's just kind of one of those little barriers that I think people don't think about. Like you have to have somebody with a car to be able to get you back to your living situation. Just if you need frequent appointments, if you're a person who's pregnant, figuring out how to take time off of, work, how to get to the clinic, and that's not even talking about the costs of the appointments. Like I feel like there are so many little hidden walls that people don't know about.
If getting from point A to point B seemed tough in Denver, trying to get to points C, D, and F seems almost impossible, especially when you don't have a car and can't afford one. Public transit can be a lifesaver for those needing care in an urban environment like Denver without having direct access to a car. Do you think that transportation, especially public transportation, is like a vital resource for pregnant people in Denver?
Absolutely. I think about public transportation as the great societal equalizer, right? Someone who doesn't have access to a car a car. I mean, now you have things like Lime scooters and you have alternative methods of transportation. But growing up, we didn't have a car. And then as a teen mother, I also didn't have a car. And so I relied heavily on public transportation. And the reason I'm able to sit here and serve today is because I had that option. Transportation gave me an opportunity to access education for myself, to access early education for my young kiddo as well, to go to doctor's appointments for myself, right, during that prenatal care, but also once I had my kiddo to take him to those doctor's appointments, to travel to grocery stores, laundromats, right, to visit friends, to have those communal experiences. And then, of course, to be able to go make money for my kiddo. And myself. And so public transportation was vital in my success. And quite frankly, had I not had the opportunity to have public transportation easily accessible to me, and we can talk about like accessibility in terms of some of the things you have to.
Oh, we will.
Okay. Some of the things you sacrifice, right, by being dependent on public transportation, but not having that mode, I would not be where I am today. I would not have a bachelor's degree. I would not own a home. I would not be able to take care of my kiddo, and my kiddo would not be at the university where he is currently.
You know, if you don't have transportation, a doula to help get you there would be really helpful. But then if you don't have transportation, odds are you're probably not going to be able to afford a doula. Not always, but you know, it's very interconnected.
Historically, the north-south connections are really limited in a lot of communities, especially communities like Montbello, which tends to have historically a lot more Black and brown faces attached to that neighborhood, folks who live in that neighborhood. Affordability is also another one. I know our regional transportation district just did all of their fares so that they're more affordable. And they're more affordable. It doesn't mean that they are actually affordable to folks' budgets, right? When I was a teen mom, I would literally spend 3 hours on the bus just to get my kid to daycare. That did not include, so that was me leaving my house in Montbello, catching 3 to 4 buses and getting my kid to daycare. That did not include me dropping him off at daycare and then me getting myself to school or to work. That makes a big difference, especially when you think about hourly employees whose time is literally money, right? To spend 3 hours on a bus when I could have been making 15 hours or making $15 an hour, right, at work, but I'm using that for transit, is really difficult for so many people. And so, you know, reliability and safety and frequent transit is really important to whether folks have the opportunity and access to the resources that they need to not just survive in our communities, but to thrive.
Public transit in Denver, as compared to other cities in the country and even in the world, is lacking. The structure of public transit in Denver is still car-centric. Instead of building the infrastructure in the city to best accommodate the people, it is built to better accommodate the cars.
When you think of youth violence, youth gun violence specifically, it's still the same neighborhoods that it has been since I was a kid. I grew up in Denver, in North Denver. My family's I'm 4th generation from Denver, right? So like I feel like we've all seen it all, but it's still these same 2 neighborhoods. Talking about Green Valley Ranch, and the number one thing I've heard from the community members there is the lack of connectiveness to the city, to Denver as a whole, but even transportation within their own little area is very, very difficult. And I would say transit across the city, it's lacking. It's very lacking. And you know, when you have to wait a really long time for a bus or get there super early to get to your appointment on time, can be really troubling.
Intersectionality is the idea that a person exists within multiple identities and includes not only how we inhabit these identities, but how it affects our access to resources. Looking at all of these separate issues and seeing how the intersectionality of things like transit, systemic racism, and poverty all affect each other, the pregnancy space is very cisgendered and heteronormative, and this doesn't leave a lot of room for queer and trans people.
I think some of the barriers that we really see is lack of accessibility to programs to help specifically people who are pregnant, and often, if not all, of the resources I can think of off the top of my head that are shelters for pregnant people are specifically only addressed to women who are pregnant. So that doesn't address anybody who might be trans or non-binary who's pregnant. That is all not thought of as like a community that can also get pregnant.
Not being looked at as just, again, a number or an insurance payout, is really negatively impacting birthing people. I mean, in terms of the maternal mortality rates, I think it was in 2018, or maybe it was 2015. Don't quote me on the year, but the maternal death rate was, I think it was like, it averaged around like 17 for every 100,000 that was the mortality rate. In 2020, that spiked to like 33% just for all women. And of course, Black women, our rate was even higher. We were up to, I think we're still sitting at about 70 deaths per 100,000 births. We are 3 times as likely to die as our white counterparts.
How are we meant to solve pregnancy care deserts when everyone is starting from such a vastly different place? How are we meant to make changes when the anti-abortion organizations make it feel like it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back? How are we meant to feel safe when the healthcare system that is built for profit sees birthing people as a paycheck rather than as people? Denver and cities like it seem so out of touch with the growing need for better care in a state that is labeled as safe. It seems almost impossible.
Coming from Kansas, where I feel like we're decades behind, I expected better of Colorado.
Well, this is where the good news starts, because it's not impossible, and it starts with empathy and compassion.
Be compassionate, treat people how you want to be treated. It's such a basic like saying, but really treat people how you want to be treated. Be kind, be thoughtful, be empathetic.
We can know from the current state of our reproductive care systems that a lot of people are experiencing a lack of care differently. Some people may have the education and emotional support from their community to have a child, but lack the ability to access transportation or even have the funds to afford the healthcare. Others may be the opposite, and there are always people in between. We should always begin with approaching these situations, whether through institutional change or collective action or otherwise, with empathy for those struggling within these deserts.
Show up. Show up for mothers. I know we all care about babies, and obviously that is a very integral part of all of this, but mothers, the people who are birthing, we need more support.
Colorado, we were a part of a package called Safe Access to Protected Healthcare Package that in the package there was a bill that we passed so that people who are seeking abortion care in state from out of states are protected in Colorado, and that their information will be protected in Colorado. So we responded to that with what we could by, continuing to ask for people to donate to abortion funds who are helping support these folks, but also doing what we can within our state to protect those people from people seeking legal recourse.
As citizens of a city with a problem that is so complex, real change can seem difficult. Comprehensive reproductive care on a systemic level can seem totally unattainable, but there are still things that we as individuals can do. For people who are just learning about this issue, what can they do to address the inequities currently with reproductive care in Denver?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the first most obvious thing is just to educate yourself. I mean, you can read books, but also just learning about what advocates are doing out there in Denver. What Planned Parenthood is doing, which is the whole Rocky Mountains, even the United States, what small organizations like the Colorado Doula Project or Cobalt are doing. Just look at what your own community is doing and look at why there's a need.
What would you say as a midwife would be most beneficial for pregnant people?
Starting young, teaching people that they do deserve good care and what good care looks like. So starting, with young girls who are maybe just getting their periods, that how strong their bodies are and how beautiful their bodies are, and that they are the experts on their own bodies. And that if we knew that from the beginning, that maybe we would feel brave enough to ask for what we want during these bigger parts, pregnancy and birth and postpartum and parenting and the rest of our lives.
I think one thing I want to drive home is don't be scared to say abortion, even if you're talking about pregnancy and birth care and all of that. Abortion still has a place in these conversations because, like I said, when people go for that, people also go for restricting and regulating pregnancies.
The thing that I will say is that reproductive health care, I mean, you've heard it probably many times, is health care. But it also is a bunch of other things, right? You think of organizations like COLOR, Colorado Opportunity for Latina Reproductive Rights. They promote not only access, like reproductive health care access, but they also support issues around housing, right? Issues around food access, some of those kind of other drivers, right? For people need just those kind of basic needs met in order to actually thrive and survive.
There are policies that are actively trying to break some of these barriers to abortion access and healthcare access generally. Like something we don't talk about a lot that should be mentioned more when we're talking about reproductive rights is birth equity. The importance of ensuring that birthing people have equitable access to reproductive health care, especially for women of color. There's a fantastic organization, their name is Soul to Soul Sisters, an Elephant Circle that is leading a bill this session and also has led a bill last session to really help especially incarcerated birthing people to have the access that they need. I hate preaching, but like voting is like the best option because it's not the only option, but voting is an option for people. It's a tool in the toolbox people should use, especially when abortion is on the ballot.
Is there anything else you want to say? Any last, like thoughts that you want the public to know about what we can do better?
Yeah. I think overall what I'm really hoping for, and I've been talking about this quite a bit, is understanding the importance of our principles and our preferences. Because sometimes we say, hey, this is a principle of mine, right? Justice is a principle of mine. However, we can move into our preferences when justice is too hard, or it requires me to be uncomfortable, or if it requires me to offend someone, or to agitate a situation in order to be able to accomplish something. And so I just hope that leaders, those who are leading in our community, do so with integrity, but do so operating in their principle and really move away from operating in our preference.
Reproductive care deserts within Denver and cities like it are deeply intertwined with oppressive social institutions as well as the physical building of the city that is not easy to change. But all across the Denver metro area, communities are actively doing the work to improve and ensure that people have reproductive care.
Like, we are there. There are people around. Mutual Aid Monday is there. We're at 14th and Bannock every Monday night from 4 to 7. If you have concerns or you need something or know somebody who has questions that needs help, we have doctors there to talk about that stuff as well from a medical perspective, and also advocates there for a social perspective. But really, there are people around you.
I implore people to do further research on pregnancy care deserts and to form solutions within their own communities to support individual pregnant people. The education here is the key, and this is the first step to a wider solution that we are all a part of.